Alright, what's up guys? Today we are going to be doing a tier list for every single champion in the game. We're not going to go position by position. I'm just going to lay it out and do the best I can to give you guys an idea of champion power levels. Strictly in competitive, I figured this would be a good idea considering we're on 14.8. Patch that MSI is going to be playing on, so I figured I'd give you guys a heads up on what you can expect to be played, and maybe some sleeper OPs that could come out, or some OP champs that are completely ignored. So we will see what happens there, but I'm just going to do my best to keep it concise. We're going to try to go through every single champion here, and I guess we'll just start off strong. Aatrox, I'll go ahead and put in A tier. He's just a solid top lane pick. He doesn't have a whole lot of bad matchups. He's not insanely OP. He's not weak by any means. If he gets ahead, he can do a lot of damage with flanks. But if he gets behind, he's not super useful. So I think he's at home there in the A tier. Ahri, I'm going to go ahead and still put in the S tier. For mid lane, she's still really, really strong. I think that she's not really a weak in any part of the game. She's got good lane phase where she can get push, she can harass well, poke well, set up for ganks. You're probably going to see a lot of Ahri paired with things like Vi, or any jungler really with easy lockdown, so you can chain the charm together. And then obviously once you get your items, she's a beast in team fights with her ult resets. Nothing new there. So Ahri, expect to see her perma pick, not perma, but consistently picked or banned at MSI. Very strong champ. Akali, I will go ahead and put in A tier as well. She's usually just picked as an answer into certain lanes like Azir or Sylas. Um, I'm not entirely sure why. I think the champion has potential. Honestly, the more I'm thinking about it, I kind of want to move her down to B, just because she has pretty easy ways to draft around, and she's also really hard to execute properly on. So, so with that said, I think I'll just stick her there. I don't really expect her to be very prevalent at MSI, or in competitive really until she gets some kind of buffs. Um, but that's where I'll put Akali. Akshan, I think, is a super sleeper OP champion. I think he should be picked all the time, but no one ever picks him for some reason. His W revive is probably the strongest ability in the game for a basic ability, passive at least. Um, and again, he's like Ahri, but just better because he scales so well. He doesn't have a weak point in the game, especially in top lane. He can trade really effectively. He has great mobility, obviously, with the resets, the W revive, and he scales like a monster and does insane damage. I don't know why no one ever plays this champ, but he's definitely sleeper OP, and I wish that people would play him. Alistar, I think this champ sucks. He's absolutely useless. He has no level 1 pressure. All he has to offer is one combo. Um, and then he's done. So if he misses the combo or doesn't get a prio target, he's pretty useless. I will say he does have potential in early bot dive, so if you wanted to play him with an early bot lane combo of something like a Kalista or a Vi jungle, you can pressure that, but he needs to be level 6 obviously for that, and even then it's definitely risky to go for dives in the early game anyways. So Alistar I'm really not a fan of. There are so many other better supports out there, even if you want an engaged support. Speaking of that, Amumu I think is actually a decent champ right now. I'll go ahead and put him in B tier. Jungle support, you can play him either one. Really, really strong tank in the jungle. Super underrated pick. Obviously insane lockdown with CC. Does an underestimated amount of damage largely. He can also be paired with a lot of ADCs in the bot lane that really like to play with CC, like Kalista, Misfortune. Really good layering of ults with that. So I think Amumu's just a solid champion that, again, no one really pays attention to. Anivia, another good champion. I'm tempted to put her in A, but I think I'll just stick her in B for now. Um, Champ's just really good. I'd say her biggest weakness is obviously early lane phase, but as soon as you're getting your Rod of Ages stacking and your tier stacking and you hit level 6, you're pretty much untouchable in the lane. You can scale for free. You have great range, great scaling. Obviously, really good terrain control with your wall. So it's just an all-around good champion. Again, that no one ever really pays attention to, and that's something that you guys have to keep in mind with this list is that there are 160 some odd champions in this game, and pro players only pick maybe 30 to 40 of them consistently. And that's not going to change really ever. It's unfortunate, but it's just the way it is. This is just my opinion. Again, you can feel free to disagree, but let's keep it going. Annie, I think, is another really underestimated pick right now. I've seen her picked a couple times. She was picked in LCK playoffs as support mainly, and I know Jensen picks her occasionally in the mid lane. She's really good because she's so easy, and again, she doesn't have a weak point in the game. She has good gank setup with her stun. Her scaling is really good, and she has good utilization of items with Malignance and Rylai's and things like that. I like her less in the support role, but she can work. But as a mid laner, I think she's actually really, really good right now. Aphelios. I kind of want to stick him in B. He can be A at some points, but I think I'll stick him in B just because he's so situational. Aphelios is a champion that you want to see a lot of the enemy draft before you pick. You can't really pick this champion early because you can just pick anything that can outrange him and doesn't have to walk into him, and then he'll really struggle. So situationally, he can be very good. He obviously scales insanely well, but if you want to pick a more consistent scaling ADC with long range, you'll probably just pick something like the Jinx at this point. Or something like the Ashe. I think I'll put her in A tier. She also has really great scaling, really great range. Obviously great utility with slows, vision, and arrow. Just a really underutilized champion. She has been picked in support a couple times that I've seen, but I honestly think she's been picked as ADC a couple times as well, but I think ADC is definitely her strongest role. Every time I see the support Ashe, it's like, even if you hit a couple arrows, that's really all you have to offer. So it's pretty underwhelming in the support role, but I think as an ADC, Ashe is definitely a pick to look out for. She might be picked up a little more in the MSI, so looking forward to seeing her more. And here we go, our first Z tier champion. Aurelion Sol is absolutely the most broken champ in the game right now, in my opinion. It's utterly disgusting. All I have to do is watch like any pro player play this champion, and you understand why it's so good. Insane scaling, insane damage, just super overtuned right now, and definitely needs some ratio nerfs in my opinion. There's not really much else to say. Just watch the champion, and you know how broken it is. Azir, I'm gonna go ahead and put in S. He's just a really solid champion. His lane phase is pretty weak, but again, he has great range and great scaling, and in my opinion, those are the two best attributes you can have as a champion. Range and scaling are the two best, well, at least range is the best scaling stat in the game. And then obviously just the fact that you scale so well with items later in the game is really, really good, because pro games are slower paced and tend to last longer than solo queue games at the very least. Azir, obviously he's been meta this entire season, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Champ is really solid right now. I expect to see him very, very prominent at MSI. Bard is okay right now. I think he might be our first C tier. He might be B tier, but honestly, yeah, I'll put him up into B tier. I think he has potential, but he really likes to be paired with certain ADCs. Things that can be self-sufficient in lane, so Bard can roam. Things like Ezreal, and other champions that can maybe farm safely under turret. Bard really likes to get out on the map and roam, so if he can do that, he's really good. If he can't do that and he's locked in lane as a 2v2 champ, he's okay. And that's kind of why I put him in B tier there. Bel'Veth, I think, is actually quite a strong jungler right now. I'll put her in A. She's definitely ignored completely in competitive play. Champ is really strong, especially since they added grubs, so you can start getting your ult stacks a lot faster, a lot earlier into the game. So Bel'Veth is definitely a really good jungler right now. She also has good versatility with build options. You can go more tanky style, more damage style. So I think the champion is really underutilized. But again, that's going to be the case with a lot of these champions I have in the higher tiers. Pro teams just aren't going to pick them. So Blitzcrank, I will go ahead and put in the B tier. This champion's mainly used as a counter into really immobile enchanters, things like Janna, Milio, Karma. You'll see Blitzcrank pretty often picked into those kinds of lanes where he can hit pretty easy hooks. You'll also see him comboed with lane pressure champions like Kalista, maybe Lucian, if Lucian was ever picked in the bot lane. But Blitz is a good champion that can punish immobile champions very effectively. But But again, he is easy to draft around and he's easy to play around. You know, if any bot lane wanted to pick Morgana ever, then Blitzcrank would be pretty irrelevant in the game. But with that said, I'll stick him in B tier. He's not bad, but he's also really easy to draft around. Brand is a champion that I wish we would see more of. This jungler is really, really strong right now. He can even be flexed into mid and support if you so choose. But especially as a jungler right now, he's still really good, even after I think they slightly nerfed his jungle damage to monsters, but he's still really, really good. His clear speed is insane, his scaling is really good, and obviously the damage is just crazy in the AoE team fights. So I think Brand is, again, an ignored champion. That's unfortunate. I wish more people would play him. He's good in solo queue as well. But yeah, definitely wish Brand was picked more here. Braum, I will put in A tier. I think he's actually quite underrated right now. He's pretty similar to the Blitz in that you pick him in certain counter matchups, like Nautilus mainly. But I think the champ's actually really underrated. Why? Because he has really, really good early pressure. You can do a lot of invades and split mapping level 1 because of the Braum passive is so strong early in the game. And he also just provides really good protection for your team with his shield. Really good CC, really good utility, just an all-around good champion that I don't think is picked enough in the support role. Briar, I honestly don't really know where to put this champion, but I think I'd put her in C or maybe D. I think this champion since release has honestly been pretty bad. She just doesn't really seem to fit a style, you know. There are certain comps that definitely want to dive and go in, but Briar really takes that to a whole new level. And so since in terms of themes, she's such an outlier compared to any other champion that she doesn't really fit with anyone else, and she's not going to fit in any comp ever. And she's also one of those champions that if you build damage on her, you're going to die instantly, but if you build more bruiser tanky, you're not really going to do any damage. So I don't think she's in a very good state right now. Maybe in solo queue it's a different story, but in competitive at least, don't expect to see this champion really ever. Caitlyn, I think, is a similar story. I'll put her in C just for the sake of having a champion in the C tier right now, but honestly, I wouldn't mind putting her in D either. I think she's by far one of the worst, if not the worst ADCs right now in the game. She definitely doesn't want to build crit right now. If you do pick her, you'd rather go lethality for sure with first strike to just be able to chunk people with Qs, headshots, and your ults. That's probably the most effective way to build her because her crit scaling is just awful right now. Yes, her range is good and she can be successful into some lanes, but compared to other scaling ADCs like Jinx, Twitch, maybe even Vayne, there's no reason to pick Caitlyn right now. She's just too weak. I think the champ is really useless in a really terrible spot right now. Camille, I will go ahead and put in B tier. I think as a support, she's utter garbage. Don't expect her to see in competitive ever. Even in solo queue, I think it's really overrated and overhyped. In terms of top lane, I think she can be strong in certain matchups, but as a blind pick, again, it can be pretty risky to blind this champion. And again, you only see her in certain counter matchups. So she obviously has really good scaling with her true damage. Maybe I could bump her up to A. I'm a little tempted to, but I'll kind of just stick her in B. I wouldn't really expect her to see any action at MSI, but again, who knows? But in terms of an overall top lane pick, she's solid, but again, not great. Cassiopeia, I actually think, is another really underrated pick right now. I'll go and put her in A. She's another mid laner that doesn't really have a weak point in the game. She has strong lane phase pressure. If you land a Q, you're just going to win the trade. That's pretty much just how it works. Her ground is a super strong ability. Any ground is just very, very strong. And her scaling is insane. She has really great DPS for objectives if you want to burst those down or maybe sneak a Baron early. She's really good thematically into what's being picked a lot these days, which is a lot of dive, short range melee comps like the Lucian, the Vi, Ahri. She does really well into those, obviously because of her ground, but also because of her ult. And when champions run into her, she's one of those champs that really likes that. So I think Cass is a really underutilized pick in the meta right now. Don't expect her to see her at the tournament, but I think she's really good right now. Cho'Gath, I also think is decent. I could put him in A, but I'll go ahead and stick him in B, just because there are better frontline options. You can build him more AP style, but I honestly haven't seen Cho'Gath in a while. I think the champion can be good, but his early game is very punishable, and if you pick any lane bully that can kind of zone him off minions so he can't get lifesteal up, he's going to have a really tough time. Champs like Rumble are going to do really well into Cho. So again, if you want to build him damage, you could do that, I think, but if you want to build him tank, there's just better options out there like Ornn, Malphite, plenty of other tanks that are going to be more effective than Cho'Gath. Corki, I will go ahead and put in the S tier. I think he's really good. Obviously, similar to Azir, these two are usually picked as answers into each other. Corki has really good range, really good scaling. His lane phase is weak though, so it is punishable, more so than Azir, I think. But Corki is overall really, really strong right now. The Malignance synergy with his ult is obviously very, very good, and obviously the package is super, super strong. So the champ's really, really good right now, and I would expect to see him a lot at the tournament, especially if Azir is open and first picked on blue side. Corki's usually going to be the answer to that. Darius, I think, is actually pretty good right now, especially in the top lane. He can jungle, he can go mid as well, but that's usually not the case with Darius. But even still, he's a really strong bruiser in the top lane. He's going to beat any tank in a 1v1, and he just doesn't really have a lot of bad matchups. He has a lot of early pressure with Ghost and W resets, getting bleed stacked up. So I don't really think this champion has a big glaring weakness other than the fact that he's really vulnerable to long range. So if you have more range than him and you can kite him effectively and kind of chain CC on him, he's going to be pretty useless. But if this champ gets on top of you, he's going to have a really good time. So I think that Darius is an underrated pick. Really, the only person who's picked him ever is Adam in competitive play recently. So hopefully more people start playing this champ. I think he's actually quite good. Diana is another champ I will stick in A. A lot of people have been doing the Lichbane Nashor's build in mid lane. It's kind of like a turret destroyer build. I actually prefer this champ in jungle. Even though that mid lane build has potential, I honestly just prefer the full AP burst style in jungle with Protobelt, Zhonya's, and just full AP from there. I think she also has a lot of synergy with a lot of champions. She can be played with Yasuo or other, Wombo style AoE champions. Her only glaring weakness, in my opinion, is that she gets countered by exhaust. So she goes in, she gets exhausted, and she's kind of useless after that. She's just stuck with nothing to do really, and her ult does no damage. But as a jungler, she has really, really fast clear at every point in the game. She has good ganking ability with gap closing, and it's really easy to play her. It feels like it's smooth. Again, she's also a flex pick, which obviously is going to help your ranking in my eyes. Dr. Mundo. This champion is complete trash. Maybe I could bump him up to C. But again, similar to Cho'Gath, but he's just worse than Cho. There are better frontline options out there. And again, every single frontliner in the game is just so easily counterable. I'm talking about specifically in the top lane. If you blind pick a tank, enemy team is just going to pick Gwen or Fiora, and you're not going to have a good time. Anyways, that should be the case. If you blind pick a tank, it's not going to be good. Dr. Mundo also, I just haven't seen played in forever. He's just not good. Not in a good spot. That's all I really have to say. Draven, I'm honestly tempted to put him up into the S tier. And I'm going to tell you why. Is because Kalista is very popular right now. And in my opinion, Draven is just a better version of her. Kalista's picked for early pressure and lane, early and mid-game skirmishes where she's really strong so you can snowball dragons. At least that's why I think she's picked. Draven can match that early game pressure, can match the mid-game pressure and skirmishing, especially if he ever gets a cash out early, and he just scales better than Kalista. He has a bit of a power trough between like 2 and 3 items, but as soon as he gets to 4 items, he's going to be one-shotting people all over the place. And if he ever gets a kill early, see, this is the thing. If Kalista gets kills early, it doesn't really mean much, or it often doesn't mean much because she's easily outscaled and outkited, or not outkited, outscaled and outranged rather. But if you get fed on Draven early, the fact of the matter is, if they're in range to hit you, or if you're in range to hit them, you're going to be killing them. You're going to be doing a lot more damage than a fed Kalista is going to be doing as a fed Draven. He also scales better than Kalista, and he's not as easily countered as Kalista, because as Kalista, if you get slowed, you're not going to have a good time. Draven is not dependent on move speed to attack fast, like Kalista is. So I think Draven's a really underutilized pick right now. I wish he was picked more. I think he's actually quite good right now. Maybe I could bump him down to A, but honestly, compared to, or relative to other meta ADCs, I think the champ's quite good. Echo, I'm going to go ahead and put in B tier. I think he's actually a good flex pick for mid and jungle. The problem is with Echo, he's just too easy to draft around, in my opinion. If you just draft any hard lockdown CC, he's not going to have a good time. We've known this since 2017, since the Jensen Echo old days. If you get CC'd, you're kind of just stuck. And the fact that he has to dive straight into you, like he has no other way of going in. He eased forward and he dashes onto you. So it's really predictable what he's going to do and how he's going to play. So knowing that information, it's very easy to counter him. With that said, he definitely has upside. He does a crap ton of damage. He has a strong laning phase because he has really good wave clear. Once he maxes out his Q, he can roam around a lot, tag team with his jungler, and affect the map. So the champ definitely has potential, but I wouldn't expect him to make an appearance at MSI at all. But again, being a flex pick as well makes it better. But I just think he's too easy to play around, especially in competitive play. Elise, this champion is utter doggy doo. Why? Because she's a full early game jungler that does not do anything past 15 or 20 minutes. Even if you get fed, it's not really going to matter. The only good thing this champion has is the ability to dive early game. She is obviously really good at that, with the ability to cancel turret aggro with repel. Honestly, just because of that, I'll move her up to C just to give her the benefit of the doubt. But I think this champ is so useless. Even when she's been meta in the past, I haven't liked her just because she's an early game jungler and she does not scale at all. Evelynn. Now, this is a champion I've talked about quite a bit. I think this is one of the most broken champions in the game. And no one ever picks her in competitive. And it makes me really sad because this champion is so overpowered. She has really strong clear at every point in the game. She has the most burst damage a champion can have, outside maybe Veigar, but I'd argue Evelynn is higher on that list. And her invisibility, obviously, her passive healing and invisibility, and just the sheer amount of damage she does is just absolutely illegal. But again, no one's going to pick Evelynn. I don't know why. She's not easily counterable. I mean, sure, she's countered by pink wards, I guess, but a good Evelynn player knows where to look for flanks and how to position properly. I really wish this champ was picked at all, really. She's just very, very good, and, you know, in competitive especially, she has great potential. You know, a couple of years ago when I was playing competitively, I picked Evelynn a couple of games and had great success. We've seen players like Malice in the past play it in competitive and have absolutely smurf on it. And it was even meta back in 2020 or 2021. And I just wish that would come back because the champion is insane. So, Ezreal, I will go ahead and put in solidly A tier. Just a really good all-around champion. And there's not really much else to say. He also offers your support a lot of freedom to do what they want on the map because Ezreal's so safe in lane. He is long range and has mobility. So if your support wants to roam, you can do that with Ezreal. You can also pair a strong ranged laner like Karma or Soraka with Ezreal and have really good lane pressure. So he's a really versatile champion. His items are also pretty cheap compared to other scaling ADCs. Um, yes, he's skill shot oriented, which means you have to land skills to do damage. Um, but I just think the champion's really good right now. So expect to see him a decent amount at MSI, I would say. Fiddlesticks is another champion like Evelynn that is absolutely broken and nobody plays. His ult is the highest base damage ability in the game. Combo that with Malignant Synergy, Leandry's Burn. This champion is just really, really good. Also, he has Fear, he has Silence, he has so much CC, he has healing on his W. Like, he has insane clear at every point in the game. I don't understand what this champ's weakness is. I don't know why people don't pick him. It's really sad to see, especially with the amount of like hard dive, let's go in melee comp teams. Fiddle would thrive in this meta, and no one even bats an eye toward this champion. It's really unfortunate. But again, like Evelynn, super, super broken champion. It has been that way for a long time, but no one picks him. Fiora, I will go ahead and put in A tier. Why? Because she doesn't really have any bad lane matchups, except, I mean, Rumble is the counter to most of these melee bruiser or tank lanes. I think Fiora is really strong because she has relatively strong early lane with not a lot of counters, and she scales. She's probably the best scaling top laner in the game. The true damage becomes overwhelming. She's super, super unstoppable in a side lane, great split pusher, even though pro teams in competitive don't really rely on split pushing as a win condition anymore. If they wanted to, they could do it with Fiora. I think she's really an underutilized champion as a counter pick, especially, for example, if an enemy team line picks K'Sante, instead of, randomly picking Renekton for no reason, maybe pick Fiora, who actually does really well into the champion. So I think, with all that being said, Fiora's very underutilized right now, really strong champion. Fizz, I will go ahead and put in C tier. I just don't really have a lot to say about this champ. Assassins in general as a class are never good and competitive, just because the game and the pacing is so strategic and careful that assassins can never really find proper angles, and it just ends up being assassin goes in for a kill, they get exhausted or peeled or CC'd, and they just end up dying. So I don't think Fizz or really any other assassin is going to have a place in competitive for a long time. The champ is probably fine in solo queue, but in terms of competitive, he has a weak lane phase. In mid game, maybe he has some one-shot potential picking off in side lane. But in 5v5 team fights, it's really, really hard to execute any assassin, let alone hitting your ult on a priority target as Fizz is really difficult. So don't expect him to see an MSI or anytime soon in competitive. Champ is not in a good spot. Galio, I will say a similar story. Maybe he could go up into B tier. He can be flexed into mid and support, maybe top if you really wanted to. But again, I just don't think the champ is in a great spot. If you did pick him, I'd recommend going full AP, just because this champ as a tank is useless in my opinion. He's basically just a taunt bot, and if you don't hit a prio target or miss your taunt completely, you're just going to stand there looking stupid. His ult is obviously a really good ability in general, but it's such a long, it's almost a 3-minute cooldown, so you really have to pick and choose when you use that. The champ hasn't been very good for years, and I wouldn't expect him to see any type of competitive presence for a while. Gangplank is a champion that has been so underpicked for such a long time and is a great, great champion. Honestly, I might move him down into A with Fiora, but I like GP, so I'll put him in S. He has a pretty weak first couple levels in the lane, but he scales so ridiculously well. His item spikes with, as soon as you get Sheen, Cole, and lane, you're chilling, and the game is pretty much free from there. So I really like GP. I think he's underutilized, especially into tanks. You can just pick GP and have a free lane to scale. It's pretty much that simple. His ultimate is an insanely strong ability. His barrels are very, very good. And just, I think the reason I'll put him in S is because the potential is there. If you're a good GP player, you're going to have an immense impact on the game, and you're going to be hitting immense, like huge damage barrel combos. and the skill cap on this champion is there to be S tier. If you're a bad GP, it's going to look bad. But if you're a good GP, especially in competitive, you can be really, really good. Garen is also very good right now. I'll put him in A tier. I think this champ is also underutilized. He's a great counter into Cassante, if you didn't know. But strengths of this champion, really strong in lane phase, really strong in side lane, scales really well. Really annoying to play against. If you do the phase rush build, you can just endlessly side lane, and if they come to collapse on you with 3 or 4, you just proc phase rush and literally just run away. They can't catch you. It's ridiculous and very annoying to play as, or play against rather. I played against Garen a couple times in my competitive days, and it was AIDS to deal with. Makes the enemy decision making process very, very difficult. So Garen is definitely another underpicked champion. Don't expect him to see him at MSI unless Adam decides to pull him out, or if someone actually uses their brain and counterpicks Cassante, you might see him. But other than that, probably not going to see any competitive play, even though he's a strong pick right now. Gnar. Bad champion. Why? Because he's so easy to play around. He has okay lane phase pressure, but he doesn't scale particularly well, and he's so dependent on his ult and Mega Gnar to do anything in team fights. If you're a mini Gnar in a team fight, you're not doing anything. If you whiff your ult as Mega Gnar in a team fight, you're not doing anything. So the champ is just too reliant on that one ability that's so easy to play around, it's ridiculous. You see a Mega Gnar approaching a team fight, you wait 10 seconds, and then you're good. So I think Gnar's in a really bad spot. Maybe you could do some type of like attack speed on hit split pushing build, but I think the champ's in a really bad spot right now. I wouldn't recommend picking him in competitive. Gragas, I want to put in A or S. I'm honestly kind of torn on this. I'll go and stick him in A. Go down here. Why won't he go down here? There we go. Gragas, I think the reason he's really good is because he's a flex pick. Top, jungle, mid, support even. Really high versatility champion. Even though the way top laners build him these days, the tank build I can accept if you need frontline. But the other one with Archangels and Rod of Ages, it's terrible. Generally speaking, in competitive play, I don't like mixing builds, like trying to be half tanky and half damage. It doesn't end up working well. So if you want to go tank Gragas, go tank Gragas. Otherwise, just do Lich Bane, do Storm Surge, do really heavy AP bursts, and you'll be much more effective, in my opinion. Even though people don't do that build, that's why I think he's really strong. His damage is ridiculous. Once you hit Lich Bane, you're good for pretty much the entire game. In the jungle especially, he has good clear. He also has good sustain in lane with his passive and his W. He's just an overall strong champion that is... he's picked pretty consistently, but I don't think he's executed upon very well. Graves, I'll go ahead and put in... Honestly, I want to put him in A tier. I'm going to do that because he actually did just get a buff on 14.8 to, I believe, his pellet crit damage. So I wouldn't be surprised if he makes an appearance in MSI, probably in top lane, maybe in jungle, but honestly I think he's a good pick in top lane right now and an okay pick in jungle. I would not be surprised if he appears at the tournament. He has really good lane phase into a lot of matchups just since he's ranged, and he also has obviously insane scaling. Hopefully people, if they pick him, are going to be doing the crit build because that's just what got buffed, and that's really what's always been best on him in my opinion. Lethality build is decent, Bruiser build is horrible, don't do it. But I think that Graves could definitely see some action, maybe as a niche pick for a couple people at the tournament, but I think he's pretty strong right now. Give him a go. Gwen is another pick I will put in A tier. Again, she's very similar to Fiora, just the infinite counter matchup to any tank in the game. She beats any melee champion in lane. She scales insanely well and is obviously a beast in team fights. You've probably seen it a cajillion times. Gwen is just a super strong champion with no real weakness in my opinion. Hecarim. I'll put this champ in C just for in competitive. He's just not great right now. He doesn't do anything particularly well. If he builds tank, if you want to build tank Hecarim, there are just better tank junglers. You can pick Maokai, Sejuani. If you want to build damage on Hecarim, you're going to ult in and instantly die. That's the big problem with this champion right now. He just doesn't have a good build for competitive. So he's just bad. I don't have a whole lot to say about this champion, but I don't recommend picking him in competitive. Top lane, jungle, doesn't really matter. Not in a good spot right now. Solo queue is a different story, but again, this list is purely for competitive. Heimerdinger, I will go ahead and put in maybe B. I'll stick him in B. Why? Because he's a top mid and support flex. We saw, I want to say a year and a half ago, back when DRX won Worlds, Heimer support was obviously the bee's knees. Everyone was picking this for the pushing. It was all about the pushing prio bot lane back when bot lane was super OP. The champion definitely has potential. I'd say mostly in lane phase, just because he's pretty much guaranteed a perma prio lane. So your jungler can definitely play around that side of the map pretty well. Again, he's a 3-way flex, which makes it better. His damage is also just good, and he's really pretty impossible to gank in my opinion. Every time I try to gank a Heimerdinger, it never goes well. So I think that champion is okay. I wouldn't expect to see him at the tournament, but he definitely has potential in competitive. Hui, I will go ahead and put in the S tier. This champion is just really good. His only weakness is mobility, but again, once you scale up and get a couple points in your abilities, he's very safe. He has a stealth, I believe, he has a fear, and his range in scaling is just absolutely absurd. I think the champion's honestly just broken with the fact that he can literally kill you from off the screen. Just having those kinds of abilities is so good, and this champion is super good. He's definitely in the top echelon of mid laners, and I wouldn't be surprised if he was very high priority at MSI. Alawi, I will go ahead and put solidly in B tier. I think that she's just solid. She does well into most tank matchups, but again, if enemy team blind picks a tank, I don't think Alawi is your first option. Your first option is going to be Gwen or Fiora, right? So she's a little lower down on that tank counter list. As a blind pick also, she's pretty much countered by anything ranged. She's going to get harassed pretty hard. She's also just too dependent on hitting her E. If you hit it, you're good. If you don't hit it, you're going to die. That's pretty much the end of the story with Alawi. So I think she's a bit too dependent on that ability, and that's why she's in B tier. She definitely has angles to be picked in competitive. I wouldn't expect her to be picked by any pro player currently, but she definitely has potential. Irelia, I'll also put her in B tier. I think that she also has potential, but she's very easily countered by things like Frozen Heart, by Malphite, CC stacking is very bad for Irelia. She's just pretty easy to play around. Obviously, the skill cap is very high on this champion, but what makes GP S tier and Irelia B tier is the fact that GP's skill cap includes his scaling. Irelia's scaling, while good, is just too hard to execute on consistently. GP, if you don't land a barrel combo, you still have your ult, you still have barrel autos and parlays. Irelia, if you don't land your combo and get passive stacks up, especially in team fights, you're gonna be looking pretty useless. I think this champ has some potential in top lane in some skill matchups, but I don't think she's in a good spot in competitive at all. Honestly, I would even recommend building AP Irelia if I saw her in competitive at this point. That's not going to happen though. Ivern, I'm glad we got to this champion. Another perma OP jungler that's never picked. He was picked, was it at the beginning of this year or the end of last year? He was gaining a lot of popularity, but this champ again is just super broken. Infinite shields, cheap, easy itemization, easy clear speed. The champ is just really easy to play and also has a high skill cap with daisy control. His shield ratio, his AP ratios are absolutely through the roof. This champ is just kind of ridiculous. Um, he can also be flexed into jungle or mid, sometimes even top lane if you wanted. I really wish more people were playing Ivern, but again, no one does. This grouping of Evelynn, Fiddle, Ivern, and one other jungler we'll get to pretty soon have just been OP for years. And Ivern was meta for a little bit, but largely these junglers who are so broken are really never picked in competitive. It's unfortunate. Janna, I will go ahead and put, I want to say A or B. She's kind of hovering in between these two tiers. I'll go and put her in B for now. I think that as an enchanter, she has definite potential, especially into hard dive teams. She's very good for disengage purposes, but in general, she's not the strongest enchanter you can pick. In my opinion, that would be Soraka, Seraphine, Karma, champions like that. Janna's solid. She's good, but she's not the end all be all. She's good as an enchanter and good paired with certain ADCs like Draven or Jhin to stack that AD. But largely, if you're going to see an enchanter picked in today's competitive meta, it's most likely not going to be Janna. Jarvan the Fourth, I think, also got some buffs on this patch to his passive AD ratio, I want to say. I might be off on that, but the thing I have to say about Jarvan, and to Riot specifically, buffing his passive shred, or his armor shred, that's what I want to say it was. That's not the reason people weren't picking Jarvan. This champ is okay and has circumstances where he can be picked very well, specifically into low mobility teams. If enemy mid laner is something like Orianna and Ashe ADC, obviously it's going to be really good. But again, it's easy to draft around because you draft champs with dashes, and Jarvan pretty much becomes useless. Also, in terms of early skirmishing, where in early jungle pressure, where Jarvan's supposed to be strong, you can just pick champions like Vi, Xin Zhao, and just be completely outdone in every way as Jarvan. So pretty much he's just in an early game fighter jungle class, and he's not the best at that. So he's not going to be picked. There's no reason to pick this champion over Xin Zhao ever. So Jarvan's just not in a great spot, and he's also really easy to play around in champ select. Jax, I think, is a very solid champion right now. Solid top laner. He can also be flexed into jungle, as we've been seeing recently. Really strong in the jungle, actually. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some Jax jungle at MSI. He has strong lane phase. He has strong 1v1 skirmishing capability. He has strong gank setup. He has great scaling. He's just a solid all-around champion. Honestly, I'd even argue he's better in jungle than top lane right now. Most definitely, in my opinion. And he just doesn't really have a glaring weakness, this champion. So, very solid champion, and I would expect to see him consistently at MSI. Man, we got a lot of champs to go. Alright, Jace, I'm going to put down here in C tier. This champ is just pretty weak right now. I don't really know specifically why. Maybe the items just don't work well on him. But there are just better mid and top laners out there. Maybe you could pair him with something like an Ezreal to do something like a poke comp, or an AP Kai'Sa with a Jace poke comp. I know we saw that last year a little bit. But honestly, I don't know why we haven't seen Jace picked. Maybe he could be moved into B, but I just don't think the champ's very strong. His hammer form is also very risky, and if you don't land your shock blasts, you're not going to be doing a whole lot on this champion. Honestly, I'm going to move him up to B. I think he definitely has potential, but again, if you want to pick an AD mid laner, you're probably just going to be picking Tristana in all likelihood. So maybe we'll see some Jace at MSI. I honestly don't know why he's not being picked. He's not bad, he's not great, he's just kind of there. Jhin is another one of those champions. I actually think that Jin's in a better spot. He has been, like, significantly so, than in years past. Last year and in years past, I thought this champ was absolute doggy doo, super useless. But this year with the new lethality items, I've played him a couple times, and I actually think he has quite a good potential. Again, he has good synergy with certain supports like Janna, Morgana. Anyone who can chain CC with his W easily is very good. The only, or not the only, but the biggest downside of this champion is just the fact that he doesn't do the highest DPS. He's more of a burst ADC, which isn't really typically what you're looking for in a scaling carry. Again, in the current state, if you want a scaling long-range ADC that has the best DPS, you're just going to pick Jinx, and that's the fact of the matter. So Jhin is, like Jace, kind of just there. He's not great, he's not bad. He's pickable in certain circumstances, but probably won't see him in competitive play anytime soon. And here we go, Jinx. Speaking of, she's solidly in S tier. Her biggest weakness, the reason why she's not Z, is mobility. Obviously, yes, most Jinxes bring Ghost, and she has resets, so I probably look stupid saying mobility on Jinx, but mobility meaning she does not have a dash or a gap close. And so if you pick someone like Jarvan or with easy lockdown CC, Jinx can be very easily dealt with. She can also be dealt with by strong early laners like Lucian or Draven or even Kalista. Yes, I know. But this champion is just really strong. As soon as she hits that 2-item spike, she's pretty much online, and she's going to be doing immense damage in the team fights. Her long range, she has self-peel with her chompers. Just a really, really strong champ right now. That's all I really have to say. K'Sante, I will pick in A tier. Obviously, we've all seen what this monstrosity has done and can do in competitive play. The reason I don't have him higher is because he's actually really easy to draft around, but no one does it. Everyone just seemingly handshakes Renekton into this champion for no reason. We've seen Rumble into it a couple times, which looks great for the Rumble. There are ways to deal with this champion, namely Garen, Gwen, Fiora. Any of those three champions are going to beat K'Sante, period. And there's not really anything he can do about it. The champ is obviously good, has a lot of potential, and can just do K'Sante things. But the reason he's not higher is because he's so easy to play around and draft around. Kai'Sa, S tier. Why? Because she is the most uninteractive champion in the game. Honestly, I'm even tempted to put her in Z tier. And you might be wondering, oh, but she looks okay. She's just like any other regular ADC. No. Nobody, I think I've seen the AP poke build once or twice this entire season so far, and this is the most broken variant of Kai'Sa. It is literally game breaking because she can kill you from 2 screens away, and there's literally no counterplay. You cannot do anything against a Kalista just endlessly firing W's at you from across the map. If you do the on-hit Kai'Sa build or the AD crit Kai'Sa build, you're diving in and you're risking your own life. The AP poke variant, there's 0 risk factor and there's 0 counterplay. Even though the AD builds are probably more fun to play and more high skill cap, the AP poke build is just unbeatable. Theoretically, if your team plays properly and doesn't dive in and just lets the Kai'Sa sit there, as soon as she hits her 3-item spike with Ludens, completed Man Immune, and Crypt Bloom or some kind of pen item, she's going to be one-shotting everyone. You literally, if you're approaching an objective fight, you just let her sit there, and 2 or 3 W's later, someone's at half or less HP, and you can walk in for free, and the team fight doesn't even end up happening. That's how uninteractive this champion is, and if people opened their eyes and realized how broken this is, people would be picking Kai'Sa a lot more. Kalista, now I'm probably going to get some glares for this, but I think this champ is utter garbage. Why? Because she's just pure early game potential. And even if she gets fed in the early game, it doesn't translate to her being strong because she has a pea shooter for a weapon. The lethality build maybe is better than the on hit. I don't even know which one is better. I think they're both bad. there are just better champs that can be picked. Like I said earlier, if you want a strong laning ADC that can snowball early, pick Draven. Draven's just better than Kalista because he scales better. Um, I just don't think Kalista's a strong champion right now. I don't think she has been for years. I know it's not a popular opinion. It's just my opinion. But I think the champion is way overvalued, way overpicked. She's probably going to have super high presence at MSI, so expect her to be picked a lot there. But I'm just not a fan of this champion, and I think she's very overrated. Karma is very, very good right now. I'd put her in the A tier. One of the best enchanters you can pick in the bot lane. She can also be flexed in the mid lane and in top lane, so that makes her very, very hard to deal with in draft. At the beginning of the season, we saw a lot of Karma with Malignance. It never really stopped being good. People just stopped picking it. The champ is just really good, really high value flex pick in the draft, and she can be paired with a lot of ADCs with like longer range poke like Varus or Ezreal in lane. It can have a really, really strong impact in the lane phase, and obviously scales really well. Now, Karthus, this is the other jungler I was talking about that is utterly broken that no one plays. It's been the case for years. This is one of the most overtuned champs in the game, and one of the most game-breaking champions. Why? Because it's like Kai'Sa and it's uninteractive. You press R from Fountain and you kill people and you get money for it. You take first strike, in competitive at least, you take first strike, you just permacycle your camps. You do not have to do anything else as Karthus. You just permacycle camps, permafarm, farm first strike gold with your ult. And by 25 minutes, you probably have 2, maybe 3 items if you've gotten a kill here or there. And you can give the first 2 or 3 dragons, and by the time the Dragon Soul fight comes up, you're just going to win the game. That's my opinion on Karthus. He can also be flexed to literally every position on the map if you really wanted to. The champ's just broken, and no one ever plays him, and it's really unfortunate. Kassadin, I think, is solid right now. I want to put him A tier. I think he's realistically hovering between A and B. He has a better early laning phase than people give him credit for. He can survive. Once he hits 6, he's pretty much fine. Once he hits Malignance Lichbane, he's even more fine. Obviously, whenever people talk about Kassadin, they always point toward his scaling. Level 16 Kassadin is unbeatable, but he's actually stronger in lane than people give him credit for, which is why he's an A. The reason why he's not even higher is because he's really hard countered by any hard CC team comp. He can get chain CC'd very easily, and in that sense, he's not higher. But I think he's definitely pickable right now. I wouldn't expect him to be seen at MSI, but I think he definitely could have a spot in competitive play. Katarina, trash. You're only going to see this champ in solo queue one tricks. In competitive play, she's never going to have any value just because of the amount of CC in the game. She's also she's too reliant on a reset. If she gets it, sure, she has the potential to pop off, but again, if she gets exhausted or stunned ever, she's just going to die and look stupid. So this champion is just garbage, and I wouldn't expect her to see her in competitive ever. Kale, I will go ahead and put in B. I think maybe she could go into A, but I'll stick her in B for now, just because she's so abusable in the early game. If you pick her in top lane, I honestly think she might be better in mid because it's a shorter lane. If you pick her in top, she's so prone to ganks because the lane is so much longer. She doesn't have any mobility. Obviously, she scales like a beast, does insane damage once she hits 16 and a couple items. But everything before that is pretty rough for Kale. She's definitely pickable and has certain matchups where she can play the game. But I don't expect her to be seen in competitive. She's pretty similar to a lot of these champions. Not great, not bad, just kind of there. Kayn, I will also stick into B tier. The reason why he's not higher is because his early game is so weak. This champion, he doesn't exist until he has form. In competitive, I would highly recommend going Red Kayn. I think it's actually very, very strong, very underutilized right now. But like I said, before you get your form, usually around 15 minutes, maybe even later in competitive, you're not a champion. And so in competitive, It's very, very hard to execute on this champion. The only time I've seen it ever really do something was in 2022 Worlds when Canyon pulled it out a couple times and had some pop-offs on that. But other than that, he's too dependent on getting his form early, useless early, and even then, he falls short in the damage department and falls short pretty hard countered by CC. Kennen, I will also stick in B. Like a lot of these champions, I'm just sticking in B because there's nothing special about them. Like they have potential to be picked and could be picked in certain circumstances, but they're just largely kind of there, is the case I'm finding with a lot of these picks. Kennen does well into some melee matchups, can abuse that, some tank matchups well, has really, really good potential in team fights. Obviously, we've seen Kennen's pop off in AoE team fights before. Again, similar to Diana, he's just countered by exhaust. Kennen dives in, ults, he gets exhausted, and he's not going to do any damage. That's just kind of the way it is. It's unfortunate, but it's the way it is. Again, he's just kind of there. He's not great, he's not bad, he's just kind of there. Kha'Zix, yet another champion that's just kind of there. I think he has potential, but again, like I said with, who was it, Fizz? Assassins are just kind of rough in competitive play in general. Now, Kha'Zix was picked, was it in the LPL playoffs or LCK? Was it? I think it was LCK actually. Kha'Zix was picked and was quite successful, won the game. So I'm not saying he's awful. He has spots where he can be picked, mainly into immobile squishy champions. But he's not great early, and he's too reliant on isolations to assassinate people effectively. So again, I think he's okay. He has potential, but he's just kind of there. I wouldn't be surprised if he was a niche pick for some Eastern teams in MSI. I wouldn't be expecting him to be played consistently. Kindred, this champion is very, very good right now. Very underpicked. Go down there. Very underpicked right now. Champion is really good for several reasons. One, her early game is actually quite good. She has good gank potential with gap closing and is slow on her E. She has healthy clear. She has insane scaling. Her ult is one of the strongest ults in the game. And she's a counter into a lot of the champions being picked right now. Considerably, Vi. Why? Because Vi clicks one button and has to go in, and then Kindred just ults, and whoever they were focusing down with Vi ult is just alive, and the enemy team is just stuck. So Kindred is actually a good theme counter to a lot of meta picks right now. Definitely underutilized, insane scaling. If you pair her with an enchanter in the mid lane, she can go crazy. The biggest weakness this champion has is marks. Oftentimes, in solo queue, you see the Kindred player Omega greed for marks and end up dying a lot. In competitive, I think it's actually the opposite. I think the Kindred players are too passive in going for their marks, and they end up only having one or two by like 25 minutes, and you really want to get to that 4 for that range upgrade. So I think that Kindred's a really difficult champion to play and execute on, finding the balance between aggression and farming to get your marks and things like that. But largely, the scaling is there, the ganking is there, just a really strong champion overall right now. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw her a little bit at MSI. Kled, I will put him in the, maybe hovering between B and A, but I'll stick him in B tier. I think he's a strong early skirmisher in top lane, really strong in the 1v1s, pretty much at every point in the game, really. But the problem with this champion is that he's so one-dimensional. His ult is literally called the charge, so you know when it's happening and you know what's going to happen. So you can just pick any disengaged ball comp into Kled and you can kind of just win. Things like Swain, Seraphine are going to do really well into this champion. Not specifically in the top lane, but thematically in team comp. Kled is just too one-dimensional in my opinion, and he only has one way of playing the game. But he's still a pretty strong top lane pick, and has a lot of potential in the 1v1. Again, a champ that's just kind of there. All right, Kog'Maw. I think this champ kind of sucks. I'll put him in C tier. he has a lot of issues. He's too reliant on items. He doesn't have enough early pressure. He's too immobile, and frankly, he just doesn't do enough damage. There are cases where you can, have lethal tempo stacked. You can have your W on. And you can really open up and start blasting. But that doesn't really happen ever. This champion is too easy to abuse early. He's too immobile, and he's too reliant on getting his items to be relevant. Again, if you want to pick a long range scaling ADC, you're gonna pick Jinx. That's it. Cog is not in a good spot right now. As is this champion, LeBlanc. I will also stick her in the C tier. Like I said with every other assassin listed so far, assassins just aren't great in competitive play in general. Was it last year or 2 years ago? Whenever Static Shiv was reworked, we saw that just absolute trash Static Shiv build with LeBlanc. It made me want to throw up every time I saw it. This champion is an AP burst assassin. That's what she's meant to do. So you want to build AP, stack pen, things like that. I think she doesn't really have any hard winning matchups. She has high skill cap, but I just don't think she's in a great spot right now. Definitely not high on the mid lane priority list compared to the scaling of things like Azir, Corki, Aurelion Sol, and things like that. Lee Sin, this is going to be another unpopular opinion, but I think this champion is utter trash. One of the worst junglers you can possibly pick in competitive play. Why? Because if you fall behind one tiny bit, you're useless. It feels so bad to play as the Lee Sin if you fall behind. Again, the champ scales like crap. Pro players are like, oh, he scales with skill. Yeah, shut up. All right. The champ is utterly useless past 20 or 25 minutes, and he's too dependent on his kick to do anything. Sure, sometimes, occasionally, a pro player will find a really nice in-tech, a really nice flank kick angle, and when it happens, it's cool. And it's like, okay, yeah, sure, Lee Sin was useful. But that happens very few and far between. Again, it really comes down to the fact that you're picking a strong early game jungler. Okay, well, he's not the best at that. You would just rather have Xin Zhao or Vi even. And then he doesn't scale as well as either of those champions, and he doesn't do anything if he ever falls behind. If you fall behind as Xin Zhao, he's still playable and strong in skirmishes. If you fall behind as Vi, you still have reliable lockdown with your ultimate. Lee Sin doesn't do anything if he falls behind, and it feels so awful to play at that point. I think the champ is trash, and it has been for a long time. Leona, I will go ahead and stick in B tier. I think she's actually pretty underrated as far as engaged supports go. Obviously, the primary engaged support we see nowadays is Nautilus. I think that champion is way too overpicked. Pretty much just a free kill to the enemy team, honestly. But I think Leona is okay. She's kind of just a worse version of Nautilus because you have to hit her ultimate and her E, which doesn't have as good of a hitbox as Nautilus Q, I'll give it that. But yeah, Leona's another support that's just kind of there. But I wouldn't expect her to see her in competitive play just because there are other better options at engaged support. Lilia is a very underrated jungler right now. She's just strong at every point in the game. Great early clear. Her stacking move speed is super broken. She synergizes great with items like Lianju's and Rylai's. Her scaling is great. Her move speed is insane. There's just not really a weakness of this champion in my opinion, unless you have like point and click CC, I guess, would be her weakness. But again, she can kind of just run away very quickly. The champ is definitely underpicked right now. I wish more people would pick her. Definitely a very strong champion in the current competitive climate. Lissandra, I'll stick her in C, kind of hovering between C and B here. She has one strength, and that's her utility. She has a lot of good CC and lockdown. She has one big weakness, though, and that's the fact that she doesn't do any damage. If you build her full AP, she can do damage, but you're going to get one tapped. If you build her more like survivalist with some utility tanky mage items, you're not going to do enough damage to warrant picking her over any other mid laner. She doesn't scale particularly well. She doesn't have a particularly strong early lane phase. The champ's just not great right now. Again, her biggest strength is definitely her utility and lockdown. But if you want to pick that in the mid lane, just don't. Pick it somewhere else. That's pretty much that. Lucian, I think, is actually a really strong champion right now. But considering this is a competitive tier list, and the way competitive players play Lucian is so bad, I'm actually going to put him in D tier. Why? Because I've been preaching about this for I don't know how long. The first strike Lucian build with Static Shiv Rapid Fire is so bad it makes me nauseous every single time I see it. And that's why I'm putting him in D tier, is because it looks like he's strong when it does like these nice little pokey bursts in mid lane. How often? The question you have to ask yourself is how often is that poke burst actually translating into anything meaningful inside the game? And in addition, this build just scales like trash. It does absolutely zero damage to tanks, and similar to Lee Sin, if you fall behind at all, you can't play the game. Now, if people in pro players were playing Lucian properly with press the attack and regular crit build with Kraken Slayer, Essence Reaver, and Navori, and they were actually able to do damage and consistent DPS, this champ would be up in A tier. But the way Lucian's played now is just so awful. I hate it, and I think the champ deserves better. It's really unfortunate, but this is just the way it is. I wouldn't be surprised if Lucian Nami is super high priority at MSI. I wouldn't be surprised if it has some solid performances because people don't know how to play or draft into it. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. But again, this is my subjective opinion. I think the champ sucks with the way people play it in competitive currently. Lulu is just kind of a good champ. I'll just put her in A tier. Lulu's always been just a solid scaling enchanter pick. You can pair her with a lot of different ADCs. Very versatile champion, offers lots of CC depending on the situation. She can offer speed, polymorph, shield, damage. Her ult is very strong. Just a strong champion overall, and she scales very well, so not much to say there. Lux, I will go ahead and put in B tier. I think this champ's biggest strength is her flex capability in draft. Mid and support can both have Lux. Her mid lane is actually quite good because of her range. It's very difficult to punish Lux if she's positioning properly inside of the lane. Even though she has low mobility, if she's playing properly with range, she should be pretty safe typically. In support, she's I think a little less good, just because it's a much more volatile lane and in competitive at least. Mid lane is usually pretty chill with some poking trades back and forth, but bot lane there's usually a lot of scrapping. And the problem with Lux is that against good players especially, it's actually surprisingly hard to hit her abilities. And if you miss your abilities on an ability champion, you're going to be looking pretty useless. So Lux definitely has potential in competitive play in certain scenarios, but I would not expect her to be picked in MSI or anytime soon, really. Malphite, I think, is a really underrated pick right now. I'm going to put him in A tier. He, in my opinion, is the second best tank top you can pick behind Ornn. This champion is just really good as a frontliner. He's also a good flex pick between top, mid, and even jungle, maybe support, even if you wanted to, potentially. And the good thing, especially about him in the top lane, is because he can weak side really effectively. He's one of those champs that even if you kill him, it's not going to matter. He's still Malphite. He's still going to be super tanky and offer his ult, and that's all he really has to do. Just the fact that his kit has his ult makes him really good. He's not even he's optimal into a lot of AD, but you can pick him into really any situation. I recommend that as a blind pick though, because like I've said, any of these tank killers in the top lane are going to do really well into tanks blind pick. But I think Malphite's definitely an underutilized pick right now and should be seen more in competitive for sure. Malzahar is another champion that's exactly like that. This champ doesn't really have a weak point in the game. He has insane wave clear, Like honestly, a completely uninteractive lane phase. Once you get Lost Chapter and 3 points in your E, you just perm wave clear and never interact with a mid laner again. Um, Insane scaling damage. Ultimates are super strong ability, solid range. His biggest weakness, I guess, is immobility, but you have your spell shield to somewhat protect you. I'd say this champion is really, really good, and he has been for a long time, but no one picks him for some reason. Another one of those champions. So I wish that more people played him. Maokai is just really, really good. I'll go and put him in S tier. He's kind of been S tier for a year plus now. If you want a scaling frontliner in the jungle, Maokai is obviously your best option. If you want to delude yourself into thinking it's Sejuani, be my guest. She's fine, but Maokai is just so much better. His ultimate is such a broken ability. It's absurd. You start the dragon, you start hitting it. When the dragon's at half HP, you throw out your Maokai ult, and an enemy team is stuck, and you just get the dragon for free, and then you walk away. And it's pretty simple to execute on. He has point and click CC, he has good jungle clear, he scales really well, he has vision control with his saplings. Obviously his ult, like I said, is super broken. This champion doesn't have a weakness, and he's just easy to play and super broken. So he has been falling off recently. I don't know why people have been picking him less. If people want to tank jungle, they've been going more towards Sejuani. But Maokai is just as good as he's always been, and definitely really good right now. Master Yi, I'll put down here, just because he's similar to Assassins, except like worse in that he just gets countered by any CC. If he gets CC'd at all, he's just going to insta-die. Obviously, he has the capability to 1v9 a team fight and go crazy, but in competitive controlled environments with the pacing and the strategy the way it is, Master Yi is just never going to have a place. He's just a solo queue champion, and that's the nature of it. Milio. I think Milio's actually pretty good right now. I'd say he's hovering between B and A, but with the way other enchanters are, actually, yeah, I'll put him in A. I think he's actually pretty underpicked right now. Milio Lucian is just a better version of Nami Lucian. Why? Because Milio's an actual champ and Nami isn't, and Milio scales insanely well, and his ult is a super good ability. The weakness he has himself is his immobility and he's really slow. His base move speed is very slow, but the champ is insane. He has shields, he has heal, he has extended range, he has a CC cleanse, he has a knockback. He's just very versatile. He scales insanely well. He has great lane pressure. If you want to pair it with Lucian, it's probably one of the strongest early bot lanes you can pick. It's so much better than Lucian Nami. I don't know why no one picks it, but Milio rather is definitely an underrated support enchanter pick right now. Underrated, speaking of, Miss Fortune is actually pretty solid right now. I'll put her in B tier. Her lethality build is very, very strong, and I wish that more people played it. You could even flex her and go AP support variants. It's very, very strong, uninteractive too. You just kind of throw down your E and you walk away. Again, people aren't going to pick this, but I think that she definitely has a place in competitive in certain matchups. I'd even be tempted to put her up into the A tier. But yeah, very, very strong champion right now. I'm going to take a sip of water. Oh, man. My throat's getting sore. All right. Let's keep going. Mordekaiser. I think this champ is pretty doggy-do. Largely uncompetitive, but his ult did just get that buff where it can't be QSS, it can't be GP oranged, and all that good stuff. I'll put him in B. He beats most tanks in lane, I think. He scales decently well. And now that you can't QSS his ult, honestly, I think we might actually see him in competitive again. He's not the highest priority top laner by any means, but I think he's actually fairly playable. Again, when you get your items, things like Liandry's, Rylai's, and maybe a tank item, he's actually pretty solid in skirmishes. Morgana. Now this is a very interesting champion because everyone loves to crap on her, everyone thinks she's useless. I, on the other hand, think this champion is really strong. Why? Well, primarily because she's a three-way flex. Really good in jungle, really good in mid, really good at support. Number two, she's a really good counter into a lot of meta picks right now. For example, Vi, Sejuani, anyone, Nautilus, any champion that has point and click CC or is focused, like their whole kit is focused around that one CC ability, Morgana clicks E and makes them relevant. Imagine if pro teams had the initiative to pick Morgana into Vi in any position. Vi ults someone, Morgana clicks E, and Vi's looking pretty useless if she's stuck in the enemy team without even landing her CC. Just her Black Shield alone is a really strong ability. Couple that with her scaling, her CC with her Q and her ult. She has good wave clear in mid lane and support with her W, and obviously Omnivamp. Sustain in the mid lane too. This champion is just really good. She scales well, does a lot of damage, has insane lockdown. Like I don't see the weakness of this champion. She's immobile, sure, but if you're on top of the spell shields, you're gonna be pretty safe in the lane. And her jungle clear is also insane once you get 3 points in your W. So I don't know why everyone likes to crap on Morgana, and no one ever picks her in competitive, but she's really good in my opinion, and I wish that people would pick her. Naafiri is pretty much the same as every other assassin, just doesn't really have a place in competitive play with the way with the controlled environment and the strategy and the way objective fights are played out. It's just too difficult. Naafiri is going to dive in and he's just going to get one shot. That's pretty much just going to be the way it is. Not much to say there. Nami, another useless champion in my opinion. Oh, it's good because it can be paired with Lucian. Okay, that makes her E useful. I mean, she literally, the whole thing behind Nami Lucian. The Nami builds Mandate and presses E on Lucian. That's all it is. Other than that, this champ is useless. Her bubble can be good if you land it consistently. Her W's an okay heal. And her ult is, an okay ability. But it's pretty easily dodgeable. It's probably better used as a disengage tool than anything else. But I just think this champ is pretty trash. And if you want to pick an enchanter, you're not going to be picking Nami. The only reason she's picked is because she wants to be paired with Lucian, but I think the way both those champs are played right now are complete trash. Nasus is an interesting story. I think I'll stick him in C. In terms of top, maybe B. Yeah, I'll pick him in B because he's actually a flex. Now, this is never going to happen, but in competitive, you can do standard AD Nasus top lane, which would be fine because of the slow-paced nature of competitive play. He'd actually be able to stack and become relevant pretty well. You can do AP Nasus in the mid lane, and you can do Nasus support. And this is something that has been neglected for a long time. Since Kalista and champs like her have been super popular, Nasus should be matched in popularity. Since Kalista is so reliant on move speed, Nasus clicks W on her and she's useless. Nasus is a complete vacuum counter to Kalista in every way in the bot lane, and no one picks it. It's really unfortunate. The champion actually has a lot of potential as a flex pick, and I think he has a lot of potential as a support pick too. He has armor shred on his E. He has literally the largest slow in the game, and when you stack enough CDR, you can pretty much be withering people on cooldown. Super strong pick in the support role in my opinion, but again, no one's ever going to pick it, which is unfortunate. Nautilus. This is interesting. I'm not a huge fan of the champion in general. I think he's pretty overpicked, but in terms of engaged supports, he's probably the best one available. He has just in terms of duration the most CC available out of an engaged support, if I'm not mistaken, and it's also point and click compared to something like Leona. Point and click CC is really nice to have. His Q hitbox is obviously insane. He has a shield. He has a slow. Just really good comboing CC. There's not a whole lot to say about this champion. He's obviously going to be probably the most highly prioritized support at MSI. If it were up to me, I wouldn't really be picking engaged supports at all, but since they're pretty meta right now, and he's probably the best one available, I'll stick him in A tier. Nico, I think, is also A tier right now. Hello, A tier. Recently she's been picked honestly more as a support than a mid laner, which I don't like. I don't like AP supports in general because they kind of make your ADC useless as well. But I think she's still really, really strong as a mid laner, literally just because of her ultimate. The ability to disguise and flank in team fights is very high skill cap and really cool to see good players utilize. But just in general, she does a ton of damage. She has great CC layering with her R and her E, and she just does good damage. She's an all-around very good champ, and just the fact that her ult exists the way it does is just, she's always going to be good. So I hope people pick her in the mid lane more so than support, but I would not be surprised if we saw her at MSI pretty consistently. Nidalee, I'm glad we get to this champ. Absolute garbage tier champion. Kind of the same story as Lee Sin. You're picking an early game champion to be outdone in the early game by any other champ like Xin Zhao, Vi, anything. You scale like trash. If you don't land a spear, you're looking pretty useless. That's pretty much it. Sure, you could pick her comboed with Renekton or Pantheon or something in the top lane. But when you're picking double early game topside, if anything goes wrong ever, the game's just over. And even if you do get ahead, you're not guaranteed to win because, again, you're early game champions and you get outscaled by pretty much everything. So I'm not a fan of Nidalee at all. I think she's doggy. But, I doubt we'll see her in the near future anyways in competitive. Nyla, I think, is in an interesting champion. In the current competitive climate, I'm going to put her in C just because but enchanters aren't often picked. And Nyla really wants to be picked with an enchanter. She's really good with Taric, she's good with Soraka, she's good with Sona. But again, no one really plays these champions consistently in competitive play. With that said, I'll put Nyla in C. If she's paired with one of those champs, I would argue she's A. She scales well, does good damage. Her W is a super OP ability. Her biggest weakness is her range and the fact that she can just be kited around very easily in some cases. But she's still a good champion, but I'm just putting her in C just because of the fact that no one plays her best pairings, really. Next up, we have Nocturne. I think he's okay. I'll put him in B. I think he's okay. But the thing is, whenever a team picks Nocturne, I always just look at it and think, it's kind of random. He doesn't really have a specific purpose in the game. He's not strong in the early game. He doesn't scale particularly well. He's not a great team fighter. He's really built for picks with his ult in the side lane, which I guess he's good at. But the champ just seems kind of random to me in every single circumstance he's picked. He's a good early skirmisher, I guess, with lethal tempo and his fear. But outside that, the champ doesn't really have a glaring strength. And he definitely has more weaknesses than strengths. So I don't think the champ is all that great right now. I'm actually going to move him down to C. Nunu, in competitive. Interesting topic. I'll put him in B. He's obviously never going to be picked. Let's get that out of the way. But I think he has potential. AP mid lane can work with Perma Roam. Jungle can work. Even support might be able to work with a roaming style. Again, no one's going to pick this in competitive. But I think the champ is actually pretty good. Especially in the jungle too. His objective control is absurd. Like if you pick Nunu in the jungle, you're guaranteed 2 dragons by 12 minutes. That's pretty much how it is. So he's really good for that purpose. Playing around a winning bot lane would be good for Nunu. Again, he's never going to be picked, which is unfortunate. I think he has potential, but is what it is. Olaf. He just got buffed in jungle 2 patches in a row, actually. No one's going to play him in the jungle. I think he's okay. He has potential. I'll stick him in B. He's a decent counter matchup in some top lane matchups. But in terms of jungle, I think that his playstyle is too linear and he's too dependent to have an enchanter with him. If he has a Soraka or a Karma or a Seraphine with him, something like that, he can really go to the next level. He'd probably be A tier. But since no one picks those champions and no one has the thought process to pick one of those champions with Olaf, he's just kind of here. And he's not great, he's not bad, he's just kind of there. Orianna, I think, has always just kind of been a solid mid lane pick. Like the quintessential control mage pick. Her shockwave is obviously a really strong ability. She has good lane presence, good scaling, good team fighting, good side landing. She's just an all-around champ that's always been pretty good. And there's not really much more to say about her. Ornn, absolutely broken. He's going into S tier. The list is getting too big for me to just drag it up. But yeah, Ornn is just the most broken top laner in the game, in my opinion. I don't know why he's not permapicked. I don't know why he hasn't been permapicked for the last year. He wins most lanes, even as a tank, let's be honest. He does ridiculous amounts of damage for no reason. He has great CC. He has long range engage, which is really nice for team fighting. And obviously his scaling is absurd with the items he gives out. Approximately 5,000 gold in stats. The champ's just broken, and I wish more people picked him. Obviously, blind picking any tank is risky, but like I said, if you were going to blind pick any tank, he's the least punishable out of any of them. He's by far the best top laner in the game, in my opinion, and he should be picked more. Pantheon in competitive, looking pretty bleak. I think you'll notice a trend, in my opinion. All these early game champions down here, like Lee, Nidalee, Pantheon, Olaf, Elise, these early game champions, especially in the jungle, are just so bad in competitive. Why? Because jungle doesn't get a lot of resources in competitive. Probably by 25 minutes, they're funneling most of their camps to their laners anyways. That's why these really cheap support tank builds are really popular right now, because they don't get a lot of resources, and it's a way for them to be kind of useful. But Pantheon is just bad. Maybe he can find a place in some top line counter matchups, but again, he's a full early game champ that's pretty useless by 25 minutes. Even if he gets ahead, he's gonna get outscaled, he's gonna get outranged, and he gets countered by CC pretty easily. Poppy, I actually think, is pretty good right now. 3-way flex, top jungle and support, which I think is her biggest strength as a champion in draft. Her W is a really strong ability against champions with dashes. She has good CC. She's just a pretty solid champ, and I think her flex capability is definitely what makes her A tier. Pyke in competitive, man, every time I see this champ in competitive, he does nothing. I'll put him in D. He could go up to C maybe, but I just think he's bad. He's not strong in lane, really, unless you do some kind of really hard snowballing lane like Pyke Draven or something. But he's really easy to draft around. He's really easy to play around. Like, you can literally just pick Soraka into him and win. It's pretty simple. And the amount of value you get out of your ult in competitive is going to be very low, generally. Just because it's a slower paced game, there aren't going to be as many kills, as many skirmishes for you to ult stack off of. So I think the champ is pretty useless in competitive. As is Qiyana. You're noticing another theme. Most of these assassins, if not all of them, are in the bottom 2 tiers. Qiyana's trash right now. Jungle, mid lane, doesn't really matter where you pick her. She's not going to do much, especially in competitive. Her lane phase is weak. She's going to get outranged. She's going to get outscaled by everyone. Just not in a good spot as a champion. Quinn, I actually think, is quite good right now in the top lane. She beats pretty much any melee matchup, as long as you play it right, space correctly, and don't engage with your E. You're going to be doing pretty well on Quinn. She also scales really, really well. I recommend going the lethality build with Profane Hydra. It's very strong right now. I think that Quinn is a very good top laner, especially in competitive. But again, no one's going to play her, which is unfortunate. Rakan, I'm going to put him in B tier, and he's another one of these champions that's, every time I see him picked, like Nocturne, it just seems kind of random. He doesn't seem like he has a particular strength as a champion. He does a lot of things okay, but he's not really good at one thing, which I prefer to have in a champion. He definitely has potential. He has good, like, engage with his ultimate and CC lockdown potential. but I think he's okay. If he were paired with Xayah, he'd probably be A tier. But in general, he's just okay. Rammus in competitive is a death sentence. Do not do this to yourself. If they have a full AD team, pick Malphite. He's fine. Rammus is just awful. In the jungle, he has terrible clear speed, in my opinion. His taunt is too easy to itemize and counter with things like QSS and cleanse. He's never going to find consistent value out of that. And anyone who's smart knows to not auto-attack him while his W is on. That's pretty much it. Rek'Sai is interesting. So I'm going to put her in B tier. And this is for two reasons. One, as a top laner, she's S tier. As a jungler, she's D tier. And people have been doing her both recently, which is why I'm just going to middle her in the B tier. As a jungler, this champ is straight hot garbage. Really, really slow clear speed. Not great early skirmishing potential compared to other early game meta junglers right now like Xin Zhao, and scales like a complete potato. However, in the top lane, if you can take advantage of grasp stacking and the healing, she has pretty much zero losing matchups. So that's why I just kind of put her in B, because people have been picking her in both positions. If she's in top, she's really good. If she's in jungle, I think she's terrible. All right, Rel, I think has been a very overrated champion for quite some time. I'm gonna put her in C. Obviously, she's jungle support flex, which is probably her biggest strength as a champion. But she's just so one-dimensional, and she's so easy to play around. She can only go in, she can only engage, and she can't go out. I think she's just kind of bad. And if you want an engaged support, you pick Nautilus, I guess. Honestly, friggin' pick Malphite support at this point. I don't really care. I just think most of these champions are pretty bad, and every time I see her in the jungle, I just kind of cringe. I think the champ is very overrated right now. Has been for a while. Renata, I think it's actually a solid pick right now. I'm going to put her in B, but I think she could definitely go in A tier as a support pick. She's really high value too against a lot of meta comps right now, because a lot of comps these days are very low range and want to run straight at you, which is obviously what Renata counters with her ultimate. Her bailout's just generally a strong ability. She has a shield, she has some CC. She's just a decent all-around champion. But her ultimate is just really, really good situationally. Renekton, we finally reached the big brown crocodile. Most people think this is probably an A to S tier champion. I'm gonna put him in C. I've seen games where he does well, and he gets ahead early and is a menace in team fights. More often than not, though, that doesn't happen. This champ is supposed to be picked for winning lane and having prio for like early and mid game skirmishes. He doesn't win lane really against anyone. He doesn't scale well at all, and he doesn't perform in team fights at all unless he gets a nice flank. You can't run straight at the enemy team with this champion. You will just insta die. This champion similar to Lee Sin. If you fall behind at all, you're useless. He can't function from behind. You might as well just go full damage at that point and try to one-shot someone. I just think this champion has been overrated for years. I don't think he's very good, and I think he's vastly, vastly overpicked. Just my opinion. Rengar, I think, is similar to every other assassin. Doesn't really have a place inside of the meta competitively. Honestly, I would recommend, if he was picked in competitive, I would recommend either AD Bruiser top lane or AP in the jungle. AP Rengar actually scales really, really well, better than you might think. But it's very dependent on the enemy team being grouped, so you can hit multiple people with your battle roars. Other than that, in the top lane, it can be annoying for top laners to deal with, constantly jumping, but you just have to remember that he's just CSing by doing that. So yeah, like every other assassin, he's just too easy to play around, especially since there's a big marker above your head whenever he's near you. Just not in a great spot right now in competitive. Riven, I think, is similar. We saw General Sniper play this once, the opening game of the season against an Udyr, which was supposed to be a good matchup, and didn't look great because Udyr was so broken at the time. Um, Riven is just another one of those champions. She's just a solo queue champion, kind of like Master Yi. Um, she doesn't really have any super hard winning lane matchups. She doesn't scale particularly well, and she's too hard to execute on in team fights. She's too easy to play around. She can be exhausted, she can be kited, she can be CC'd. She doesn't have one particular strength as a champion, in my opinion, and she has several weaknesses. So I don't think she really has a spot in competitive right now. Rumble, I think, is actually very strong. I'm going to put him in A tier, and this has been a counter into pretty much any melee top laner. Honestly, I'm going to move him up to S tier because he's also been flexed to support, which also has a lot of potential as well into lanes like Lucian Nami. Rumble actually just straight up wins and negates the entire point of picking Lucian Nami. So Rumble's a super strong pick right now, wins pretty much every top lane matchup, and can now be flexed into the support role, scales insanely well, his ult is super good. So definitely expect to see Rumble at MSI quite a bit, maybe mostly on the ban list, honestly. Rise did just get a tiny buff on his W, I think, but in competitive, he's probably not going to see a whole lot of action. Um, I think he's playable, but in terms of just scaling mids or scaling tops, there are just so many better options. And he's another one of these champions that pro players really like to do this kind of tank build on, with things like Frozen Heart and Abyssal Mask. It would be better if you just went damage. Like, you go Roa, and that's enough tankiness, and then you just go AP from there. Just commit to something. That's why I don't like the Azir build at all, is because you're trying to do two things at once, and you end up doing nothing very well. Azir's meant to do damage, so scale and do damage. You're not supposed to be a tank. Leave that to your tanks. So yeah, anyways, Rise, not very good. Samira, I think, is in the same boat. She has potential, but she's just too easily countered by any CC or exhaust. If she gets hit by any CC, her ult ever gets cancelled, she's just stuck, looking really useless. She's too one-dimensional. She can only go in. And if she doesn't get a reset, she's kind of just done. So don't expect to see Samira at any point competitive. She's too short-ranged and too one-dimensional. Sejuani is a solid A-tier jungler right now. Just kind of the second option after Maokai, in my opinion, if you want a scaling tank utility jungler. She's good. She has strong clear at every point in the game. She has strong gank setup, really good synergy with melee solo lanes. The only thing that, or not the only thing, but the biggest thing that makes Maokai better than Sejuani is that his CC is guaranteed, and Sejuani's ult is actually surprisingly hard to hit. With that said, she's still a solid champ. Expect to see her quite a bit at MSI, I would say. Senna. Now, this is actually interesting. In competitive, she's good. I just don't know really where to place her. Maybe at A, maybe at S, kind of hovering between these two. In theory, on paper, she's really, really good with infinitely scaling range, scaling crit, everything. She's really, really good on paper. But in actuality, with human error coming into play, her effectiveness is actually super inconsistent, I've seen in pro. Because people refuse to just scale. And people want to fight Grubs early and fight Rift Herald at 15 minutes for no reason when they scale really, really well. People also, I don't know why pro players are stuck on this lethality build. It doesn't do anything. It would be much better to just go crit with something like Storm Razor and Eye Edge, or you could even go the old build and do Kraken with Ginsu's. I think that would be better too. The champ is still really good, and can have a lot of versatile bot lane pairings with that. But just the way she's played in competitive, I will put her in A and not any higher than that. Seraphine, I think, is very, very underutilized right now. I'm going to put her in S tier. I think this champion has been so broken for so long. One of those pairings with Senna. If you have Seraphine Senna, you can do Seraphine Sona. These pairings are so absurdly broken because you can't interact with them in lane, and they'll outscale you. You won't be able to kill them because of the shielding and healing. It is so absurd. So Seraphine as a champ is just really strong. You can flex her mid, ADC, or support. Really strong flex pick in the draft. Good versatile champion. You can do damage Seraphine if you need an AP threat. She does a lot of damage. Or you can do support Seraphine and stack heals and shields, which she's also really, really good at. So she's just a super OP champ in general, and I do not know why she's never picked in competitive. She's super broken. Set. In competitive, I will say he's kind of similar to Renekton, except he scales a little bit better. But he's not great. I mean, theoretically, if enemy team picks a tank, you could take Set and try to ult the tank into the enemy team, but that's not going to be consistent. And there are just better top lane AD fighters to be picked. You can pick Fiora. You can pick Alawi. You can pick Jax, Cassante, Graves, any of these champions. Garen. Set's just one of those champions that tries to do a lot of things and ends up not doing any of them very well. Obviously, his W has a ton of potential doing true damage with those huge bursts, but again, those are inconsistent as well, so not much to say about Set. Shaco, I think we saw River play Shaco this split, and he actually won on it, even though he didn't really do a whole lot. In competitive, I think this champ is utterly useless. He doesn't do anything, even though he can be flexed jungle and support. I just think he kind of sucks. If you build him AD Assassin, again, Assassins just don't really have a place and are too hard to execute on in the competitive meta. And if you try to go AP with your boxes, it's annoying at best. It's not really going to do a whole lot. So I just think the champion is pretty bad in competitive. Shen, I think, is actually rising in ranks. I've been seeing him a little bit more. I'm going to put him in B tier. I might be overselling him a little bit. But I've been seeing him more in top lane. He can also be flexed to support. I don't know if he can still jungle or not, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that. And just his ultimate is a really strong ability. The way solo queue Shen's play is completely degenerate. He'll probably function much better in a controlled pro environment where you can make coordinated plays with his ultimate. So I actually think that Shen is pretty playable, and he actually has a decent skirmishing early lane phase too. So I'd like to see him played, even though people probably won't play him. I think he could be. Shyvana. This champ is pretty trash. Her only viable build route, in my opinion, is full AP. But no one's going to pick that in competitive, even though it would probably be pretty good. But again, anything else, if you try to go tank, if you try to go AD bruiser, it's not going to be very good. If you did go full AP, she'd probably move up into B or maybe even A tier. But no one's going to pick her, and she's just not great in the current meta. Why? Because she's so reliant on her ult. If she's in human form, she's completely useless. And if you go AP in dragon form, you shoot out an E maybe every 5 or 6 seconds. So, not a great champ. Singed. Move on. Sion, I think, is actually quite a solid frontline. I'm going to put him in A tier. We've seen G2 pick Sion a lot with starting to do the lane swap meta. I don't know if that's going to stick. Honestly, I hope it doesn't. But Sion is still a really good champion just as a frontline. Even though no one really knows how to play him, people just kind of take him as I'll accept weak side and get what farm I can because I'll still be a good frontline. If people played like the Baus, honestly, this champ would be super broken. And that's not an exaggeration. I think that the scaling, he's literally infinite scaling, and if you tried to get as much, optimize your gold and become as much as possible instead of just surviving lane, this champ would be picked much more, but pro players and pro top laners don't know how to play him. But even still, I think he's very pickable, and we'll probably see him some at MSI. I'm expecting from G2 if they continue to do the lane swaps. Sivir, I think this champ is garbage. She used to be really good a couple of years ago with the Sivir Zeri meta, but her ratios just aren't great. She still scales well, but she's just so short ranged. And into common ADCs today, like Ashe maybe, like Ezreal, Twitch. Um, I'm sure I'm forgetting some long range ADCs. Senna, she's just gonna really struggle because the fact of the matter is, if you're outranged to Sivir, they can hit you and you just can't hit them. Jinx too. She's gonna definitely have a hard time into. Um, so until she has longer range, I don't really see her being very relevant and competitive. Skarner. Now this is interesting. I don't actually know if he's enabled for MSI, but if he is, I'm gonna put him in B, maybe A tier, kind of hovering between these two. I'll stick him in B for now. I've had Skarners look really OP, and I've had Skarners look really garbage. I think he's better in top lane, but either way, his kit is pretty good. He does good damage, he has decent skirmishing. His ult is just much more predictable and choreographed now than it used to be. Well, I'm not even going to say that it used to be because that was still pretty predictable. But still, his playstyle is very one-dimensional. He wants to run at you through a wall, CC you, and pull you back into their team, and it's pretty predictable what's going to happen. Is there counterplay to it? Probably with QSS still. He could still be the QSS tax for 3 champions at once now, though. So maybe we see Skarner at MSI. Again, I don't even know if he's enabled, but I think he definitely has potential, more so in the top lane than in the jungle, maybe even a support flex, but I doubt that's ever going to happen. Smolder. Now, even after this champion got destroyed, the same thing holds true for him. His only weakness is the first 25 minutes of the game. No, unironically, this champion is so disgustingly game-breaking. With the way competitive play is controlled and paced, Smolder is always going to be broken. It doesn't matter how many times they nerf him. If he has the time to reach 225 stacks, he's going to win the game. I'd say 70+% of the time. It's pretty ridiculous. I think the only remedy that Riot really has to this champion is to up the amount of stacks it takes to get that execute, or to get that final form kind of thing. It's absurd. The only reason I'm not putting him higher than A is because the first 25 minutes of the game, he's extremely abusable. And there are situations where he can be put far enough behind to where it doesn't matter if he gets to the stacks. So those occasions do obviously happen. But again, if he reaches those stacks, he's pretty much an auto win still after the nerfs. Sona, I think, is a very underrated champ right now. I'm going to put her in A. I was talking a little bit earlier about the Seraphine Sona pairing in bot lane. It's very, very strong. This champion is fine in lane, decent poke, decent healing and shielding, but her real strength is her scaling. Absolutely absurd scaling. If you reach completed tier, Moonstone, and maybe a third item with cooldown boots, you're big chillin'. The champ is absolutely insane in her healing and shielding. If you combo that with a Seraphine and then a carry jungle, maybe like a Kindred, you're going to win pretty much every single game. Sona's definitely an underrated champion right now. Again, we're not in a meta that sees a lot of enchanters, which is unfortunate because they're insanely strong, but Sona's very, very strong, very playable right now. Soraka, another one. I'm going to put her in A as well, right there next to Sona. A lot of the same things holds true. I'd say Soraka might even be better because she has a stronger lane phase. She can have a lot more pressure with early poke and early sustain. Her silence is a good ability, and her ult is one of the strongest ults in the game. Just straight up, once she reaches level 2 ult with Moonstone Renewer, it's going to be healing ridiculous amounts. So Soraka is definitely a super OP champ right now. I'm honestly going to move her up to S tier. She's also a really good pairing with a lot of meta ADCs right now. Varus, Ezreal, she's good comboed with longer ranged pokey style ADCs. Swain, Swain's an interesting story. I'll put him in B tier. He can be flex top mid or support. I think In very close quarters ball comp type games, he can be very valuable, but he's just too easy to draft around, in my opinion. You can just draft anything with disengage, like a Gragas, a Janna, really anything that can CC him to allow you to run away. And then outside of his ult, he's pretty useless. Um, he's just too dependent on staying in his ult to do anything in team fights and skirmishes. Um, so that's why he's in B. Not much else to say there. Silas, I will also put in B. This is just a champion that's been really hard to gauge in terms of power, really since his release, in my opinion at least. He does scale decently well, but he again, with a lot of these champions, he's just so one-dimensional. He can only go in, even though he has a high skill cap and high skirmishing capability. He, I just don't see him be successful very often. Like, why would you pick Silas when you can just pick any of these scaling mids up here? Corki, Azir, Ari's fine, Hui. Like, you're not going to ever be picking Silas over these champions for any reason. Um, Maybe if enemy team has ridiculously good ults like Kindred or Malphite or something like that, you could pick Silas into a Malphite counter lane. Um, but the champ is just largely not great. Syndra, also in a similar spots. Maybe she could go into A tier. She used to be paired with Orianna. Those two used to be inseparable, like the consistent control mages mid lane. Recently, Syndra has fallen off a lot. I think she's still playable, but largely her early lane phase isn't great because she doesn't have her passive upgrades, and she's not that auto one-shot machine like she used to be with her ult. Um, so I think that she's an okay champ, but in the current competitive climate, I wouldn't expect her to be played anytime soon, again, when you can pick any of these mid laners up here. Tom Kench. I think this champ is trash. The only reason he's not D is because technically he can be flexed to top lane, where I think that's his best role. Just thinking about it on paper, when your argument for picking this support is, oh, I can eat my ADC and protect them for maybe like 3 seconds, it's silly. Like you're you're saving someone from being caught who probably shouldn't have been there in the first place. And then that's your entire kit. Your ultimate is your entire kit. You have a slow, you have a knockup that's anyone with fingers can dodge that, and he has a shield. That's pretty much it. That's why I think he's better in top lane, because his kit is much more um, built around 1v1 and sustain, in my opinion. In terms of support, I just don't think he's very good. Talia is very, very good right now. I'm going to put her up into probably the S tier. Similar to Ari, she's just kind of good at every point in the game. She's also mid jungle flex, even though pretty much everyone's playing her in mid right now. She scales well. She has really great terrain control around dragons and barons. Great CC chaining and really great burst potential. I just want to see people move away from this uber defensive build. I think tier is fine in certain circumstances, but it gets to a point where you don't do damage because you've built tier banshees and zonias. You don't have any damage. So I definitely prefer the damage build. She scales very well. Just an all-around good champion. Can roam and affect the map too as well. Solid champ. Talon, as with every other assassin, he's just going to go into D. I'm just going to stop explaining why assassins are bad. I've done that enough. Taric, I'm actually going to... I want to put that in A tier, honestly, but I'm going to put him in B tier. No, actually, I'm going to move him up to A. I think he's actually A tier. This champion's really good. I've mentioned a couple times with a couple different champions that I think they're really good because of their thematic counter to what's currently being picked. And what's currently being picked is a lot of dive, a lot of short range, and a lot of go in. And that is exactly what Taric is really good into. His scaling is also insane with his heals. He has a really good stun. And his ultimate is just a really powerful ability. The reason maybe he could move down into B is because his ult is really easy to play around at certain points, but a skilled Taric player is always going to get value out of that consistently. So I think that the champ is definitely underpicked. The only person I've really seen him seen pick him is Core JJ from time to time. So maybe we'll get a Core JJ Tarek at MSI, but I think the champ is very, very good. As with most of these scaling enchanters, Seraphine, Soraka, Sona, Tarek, all very, very good champs that no one plays. Karma too. Teemo, put him there. All right. Thresh, I think, is C tier. The reason I think he's C tier and no higher is because he's so difficult to play. Unless your support's really on fire and hitting the hooks, you're not going to be getting consistent value out of your hook. Your Flay is a good ability. Like his kit is solid, but it's not consistent, and it's really hard to execute well consistently. The only thing that is pretty consistent is your Lantern, and with that, Thresh is usually paired with a Phalios or Jinx, so they can have some kind of safety. But again, if you're picking a champ for safety for your hyperscaler, why wouldn't you just pick an enchanter that scales and can protect them? Thresh just isn't great in my opinion, and he's one of those champions that is mispicked in competitive and misunderstood. So with all of that combined, I don't think he's a great champ. Definitely overpicked. Even though he's not picked a whole lot, he's still overpicked. Tristana is solidly in A tier. Obviously, mid bot lane flex. I think she can also be flexed top if you really wanted to. Also, G2's been bringing her out with the lane swaps because she's a really, really good turret destroyer. Just a really all-around good champ. She doesn't have really a weakness in the game. She's a strong early laner in both mid and bot. She has, again, good turret damage, good objective control in the mid lane, and obviously insane scaling with the scaling range. She ends up at level 18 with the highest base range in the game, if I remember correctly. So very strong pick, Tristana. Trundle is a very interesting pick. So if I were saying that split pushing would be a consistent win condition in competitive, he'd be Z tier. Since that's not the case, I'll put him down in C. Maybe honestly he'd be even D. Sure, he can be. He can take stats from a tank. He can make a tank very squishy. He can win a lot of skirmishes in the top lane. I think the champ sucks in jungle. I think he's always sucked in jungle realistically. But he's just not going to find a place in competitive. Since split pushing isn't really a thing. I wish it was. I think it could be. I'd be willing to give it a try if I were coaching a team. But again, probably not going to be the case, and I wouldn't be expecting a Trundle pick on the horizon anytime soon. Tryndamere, I think, is actually pretty underrated right now. I'm going to put him in, if I can get him in here, B tier. I can see him also being put in A tier. The champ is just really good. He works really well with items. He's strong at every point in the game. As long as you have Fury stacked up in lane, you're going to be winning most of your 1v1s. He can dive really effectively. He outscales most top laners. Just a really solid champion that's underpicked for sure, and I wish more people played Trynd because he's quite simple to play and he's very, very good. Twisted Fates is, in my opinion, S tier. Now, this is assuming that people build ADTF correctly with Kraken Slayer Ginsu's RFC instead of that trash Energizer build. And it's also assuming that he can be flexed with the AP build as well. And I think he's still viable in the mid lane as a regular AP mage. Obviously, he still has his ult to roam around very, very effectively. And in that sense, he's a very strong flex pick, very versatile champion, and ADTF with the proper build is just super broken still. Very good champ. Twitch, I'm going to put in A tier. I think this champ has been good for a long time, and again, nobody plays him. He's another champion that synergizes really well with a lot of these scaling enchanters, like Milio can extend his range. He's good with Seraphine, he's good with Soraka. Just a really solid champion. He has good lane pressure because of his invisibility. He can get a lot of surprise trades, and his range with his ultimate is absurd. His scaling is absurd. He really has the ability to take over games very easily, especially with how competitive games are structured and paced. Definitely an underpicked champion. Again, no one's going to pick him, but he's there and he's very good. Alright, we're getting toward the end here, just 2 more rows. Udyr is still really good, and I don't know why people stopped picking Udyr. Top lane jungle flex, very, very good, super overpowered tank, who does damage. He's kind of similar to Ornn in that he's unkillable and will one-shot you, so it's really fun to play against. I don't know why people stopped playing it. I'm assuming he got nerfed a couple times, but he's still really good, so keep playing Udyr. Urgot, we saw a couple times in the LPL, was it the finals or the semifinals? It worked. It won a game, and I think that Urgot actually does well into most melee top lane matchups. Can I get him in here, please? I want him. There we go. I think he does well into most melee matchups in top lane, but his kit just doesn't fit competitive. He doesn't really have a place in team fights. He hasn't scaled particularly well. He has potential, but largely he's probably just going to be used as that counter matchup into Rek'Sai, as we saw in the LPL playoffs. Varus is a very good champion right now, and I can explain this to you for reasons not even a pro player could. And that is because his build paths are so versatile. He can do so many different things inside of the game. You can do lethality poke, you can do on-hit damage, and you can do AP. I really wish people did AP Varus. You can flex him into the mid lane, you can even flex him into the top lane if you really wanted to, although it's not as good because it's a longer lane. But I really wish people did AP Varus. It's super OP. It has been for a long time. Nashor's Tooth, Riftmaker, Rabadon's, Crypt Bloom, things like this are really, really effective on Varus. Anyways, he's so strong mainly because his builds are so diverse and he's such a versatile champion. He also just, all three of the builds scale really well, and he's always going to be really long ranged. So he has a strong lane phase because of that, and he's just not super punishable. Just a really good champion right now. Vayne, I'll put in B tier. I think that she definitely has capability to be picked in pro. We've seen Zeus pick her a couple times in top lane. I'd say honestly she'd probably be more effective in top as a tank counter, or really any melee matchup counter, than in bot lane where she's probably going to get hard bullied and outranged. But the champ is still solid, scales like a beast, and yeah, you've seen Zeus play it, so you know the potential there. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe we saw it in the top lane a couple times at MSI. Veigar is also a good champ. I'm actually going to put him in A. He's been underutilized for a long time. Really, any infinitely scaling champion is going to be really good because competitive is a really slow-paced environment, and the games usually last at least 30 minutes these days. 28 to 30 minutes. So these scaling champions are always going to get value. His cage is also just a really good basic ability in combination with obviously his scaling. His burst is absurd. The only note I have on Veigar is for players not to do the Shurelya's build. I think anyone who builds Shurelya's on a scaling mid lane mage is completely griefing. I think it's complete trash. And the only Veigar build should realistically be first item, whatever that you would want to build for that, into Rabadons. You have to build Rabadons on this champion. If you don't, you're trolling. Either way, Veigar's still really good, and I wouldn't be surprised if a couple people pull him out at MSI. Vel'Koz, I'll put him in C. He's okay. He can be flexed mid support. His biggest strength is definitely his range and his scaling. His true damage is also very, very strong. He's similar to a lot of these champions. It's like, why would you pick this when there are better options available? If you want a long-ranged scaling control mage, you're going to pick Azir. You're going to pick Corki. You're going to pick Orianna. You're going to pick a lot of these different champions over Vel'Koz. And so with that said, he's probably not going to get any competitive play really ever until probably he's reworked, honestly. And honestly, I can say the same thing for the next champion. I think Vex, honestly, I'd say Vel'Koz is even better than Vex. Vex is just kind of a weird champion to me. It doesn't really fit the competitive schema of League of Legends, in my opinion. She scales well. She has decent burst potential as an AP assassin, but it's one of those Like, pro players are good enough to where the Vex is going to ult in, and she's going to instantly get focused down and insta-die. So it's just really hard to execute on a champion like this, and I don't see her having consistent value in pro play. Vi, I'll put her in A tier. Obviously, she's been a very, very strong jungler for a while now. The only reason, not the only reason, but the primary reason she's not higher is because she just doesn't scale well. She scales okay as a frontline, but really, more often than not, you'll see in a late games team fight the Vi ult in and immediately die on impact. And so the reason you pick this champion is because her ult is easy, guaranteed lockdown CC on a priority target. And it reaches a point in the game where she gets outscaled enough to where she dies pretty quickly before your team can even follow up on that CC. Honestly, I'm tempted to move her down to B tier, but she's still very strong in the early game. She's still very strong in the mid game as a 1v1 skirmisher. And her ult, if it does get value, is still very good value. So I'll leave her in A tier. She's a fine champion. But there are better options, like a champion coming up soon. Viego, I think, honestly, as long as Viego exists as is, he's going to be OP. He scales insanely well, and just the fact that he exists like he does. He can take over a body and take over a team fight, and that's pretty much that. The champ is broken because of that, and he has been since release. It has nothing to do with his ratios, nothing to do with his stats. It's just the fact that he can do that. And it's just very, very good. He also has really good itemization paths. He's very versatile in that sense. He can go more damage oriented, he can go more bruiser, he can go full tank. He can do a lot of different things with that. So Viego's always going to be relevant. Really, really strong jungler right now. Victor, I will go ahead and put in B tier. Similar to a lot of these champions, why would you pick Victor when you can pick better versions of it? Victor is a scaling control mage with mediocre range. So again, it's just the fact, it's not that these champions are all bad, it's just that Azir, Corki, Orianna, Hui, these champions are just so good that you wouldn't ever pick anything else over them. And that's pretty much the end of the story with Victor. He's probably not bad, but he's not the best version of what he does. Vladimir, in competitive play, I can actually see being okay in certain scenarios, but those scenarios are never going to pop up, so he's going to be C. He's also pretty easy for pro players to play around with point-and-click CC. Even though he has his pool to usually avoid point-and-click CC, I just don't see Vlad ever really being relevant in pro. He does really scale well. Maybe I'll move him up to B, but he scales really well. His lane phase is just quite weak, and he's really dependent on items to get going. Alright, Volibear, I'm going to put up in the A tier. I think he's very similar to Vi, except he scales even worse than Vi. He has really good early game pressure, really good ganking, really fast farming, great skirmishing in the 1v1, and he serves as an okay frontline in the mid-late game, but really past 25 or 30 minutes, he just falls off a cliff and becomes pretty irrelevant. So if your argument is to pick him as an early mid-game bridge to enable your scalers, it's valid, but you have to think about how often that actually translates in-game. So I think the champion is solid as a jungle pick right now, but we have still yet to get to the best jungler in the game, in my opinion. Well, for early skirmishing, that is. Warwick, we're just going to put down here, it doesn't really matter. He's never going to see the light of day. The champ is just kind of bad for competitive. Even in solo queue, no one ever picks him. In competitive, though, I will say, if he were to be picked, he would be picked as a counter to Rumble top lane. Everyone is looking for the Rumble counter because he counters literally every other melee matchup. Warwick is the answer to him. Warwick out-sustains the Rumble damage and beats him in the 1v1 at pretty much every point in the game. So, just because of that, and because Rumble's so prevalent right now in the top lane, I'll give Warwick a bump up to C. Wukong, I will put in B. He's a pretty solid top jungle flex right now. He's actually pretty solid in both positions. He can also be paired with Senna down in the bot lane. We saw that a couple times years ago when Senna first released, I think. But Wukong is okay. He's just kind of okay. He's there. He's good into certain top lane matchups. He's good comboed with certain champions in the jungle. But he's not great. He's not bad. He's just kind of there again. Xayah, I will go ahead and put her in A tier. I think that especially in the current pro meta, like I've said several times before here, since the meta is so focused on heavy dive, short range going in, Xayah is a champion that really likes that. And so she's going to have a lot of value in a lot of games. Her biggest weakness, and the reason she's not higher in my opinion, is because she herself is very short ranged. So if she's early picked in the draft and, enemy team picks something like a Zir Varus, she's not going to be able to play the game. But again, in the current pro climate, I think she's fine. She's perfectly playable in a lot of circumstances. She obviously scales really, really well and does a lot of damage. So if she's paired with a Rakan, Xayah Rakan is an S tier bot lane for sure. But by themselves, they're decent champions. Xerath, I think, is kind of similar to a lot of these champions. I might bump him up to A, but he's again kind of just there. I just think he doesn't do enough damage. Everything in terms of his themes is really good. He scales decent, and he's obviously really long range. He can also be flexed mid and support, but I just don't think his damage numbers are quite high enough to compete with some of these champions. But I do, I'll bump him up to A. I think he's actually pretty playable. No one is going to play him, but I think that a good Xerath player can definitely have good value and competitive. And finally, we've reached the best early game, early game jungler in the game. Xin Zhao is definitely S tier. He's been high prio the entire season. If you want an early game powerful jungler, you're picking Xin Zhao and no one else. He also gives him he scales better than people give him credit for. He's definitely not too bad in that department. And yeah, he just doesn't really have a glaring weakness. He wins pretty much, I think, all early 1v1 skirmishes in the jungle. He's great engage, he's great peel, his ultimate's really strong. He just doesn't really have a weakness, and he's just really, really strong right now, especially with the new items. Yasuo and Yone aren't in the same grouping, actually. I was going to say I was going to group them together, but I'm not. Yasuo is probably, I'll give him C tier, because he's really only ever picked as like a Yasuo Diana Wombo or a specific counter matchup. We saw someone pick it recently into a TF top lane that worked pretty well. But outside of those very niche scenarios, Yasuo is rarely ever picked because he's just so hard countered by CC. Yone, I will give a tier higher because he does have some good top lane matchups and good mid lane matchups. He can be a good flex there. And he scales better than Yasuo, I believe. And he's less held down by CC because of the way his E works and his unstoppable R. I just think he's kind of just a better version of Yasuo in general. Yorick in competitive, again, similar to Trundle. If split pushing were a consistent win condition in competitive, I'd say he's Z tier or S tier, but that's not the case, so Yorick is looking pretty trash. He doesn't really have a lot of good lane matchups, and again, he's a split push champ. He doesn't want a team fight, and that's not a thing in competitive, so he's looking pretty bad right now. Yuumi, I will put in the B tier. I hate this champ. Should be deleted from the game, but she's solid. Honestly, I'll actually move her up to A, probably with the rest of the enchanters realistically. She's very, very good. Scales obviously really well. It's just her biggest weakness, the reason why she's not S or higher A maybe, is because she's stuck on her ADC, right? And she can't roam, she can't influence the map, she can't even put vision down, which is really what a support wants to do. Your bot lane recalls, support wants to run out and put some vision down while bot lane runs back out to their lane. But Yumi's just stuck on the ADC the entire time. So she definitely has some vision.
there's some weaknesses there. Also with face check and bushes, she really struggles with. But either way, her ratios and her scaling on her heals and her shields are absolutely ridiculous. Her ultimate's also a very strong ability. So I'll leave her in A. Zac, I will also put in A. He's a really, really strong flex right now between top and jungle, mostly in the top lane. I would even argue that you can put him in mid lane or even maybe support. But the guy's just super, super strong in top lane, especially right now as a tank. Um, you know, out sustains and wins most 1v1 matchups just by battle of attrition. Trading his HP for damage, like trading HP for Zac is always beneficial for the Zac, right? So Zac is just really strong right now, and I would not be surprised if he is seen consistently at MSI. I'm actually gonna put him into S tier. Really, really strong. Zed, every other assassin, same thing. Zeri, I will put into B tier. I think she's been gaining a lot of popularity recently, and I don't know why. I think the champion, the whole concept of her ultimate and the infinite move speed and all that is obviously broken, and we've seen it be broken for a long time. But I just don't think her lane phase is really bad right now. She can be exploited really early in the, really well in the early game, and she's countered by point and click CC, aka champions like Twisted Fate, which is super meta right now. So I think that Zeri is okay. Maybe I can move her up to A, but I think largely she's pretty overvalued right now, and you'd rather have some other stronger scaling ADCs that have longer range. Speaking of long range, I'm going to put Ziggs in the kind of hovering between A and B tier here. I'll stick him in B tier. He's still really strong though. His biggest weakness is his lane phase and his lack of mobility early game. He's very, very vulnerable, especially in the early game. Really at every point in the game, especially if he goes to a side lane. So that's his biggest weakness by far. But just the scaling, the wave clear, the damage is all ridiculous with Ziggs. So if you can get to that point, you're going to be really, really strong. The problem is getting to that point. Zillion has been underrated for a long time. I'll stick him in B, although honestly I could put him higher. He can flex mid support. Just the fact that his ultimate exists is really insane. He has good wave clear with bombs. He has good utility with speed ups and slows. And stuns if you hit double bombs. Just a really, really strong champion that hasn't been relevant in years, really since Bjergsen retired. So Zillion is always going to have relevance in my opinion. He's always going to be pickable in certain circumstances. Not to say that pro teams will pick him, but he's going to be there and he's going to be pickable. Zoe, I'm going to put in C right now. I just don't think the champion is very strong, especially in the mid lane. She doesn't scale better than any of these mid lane mages that are up there, and she's too dependent on hitting her skills to be relevant. And with that said, even if she does hit a bubble, it can easily be cleansed or QSS'd or anything like that. So the champion's really easy to play around, draft around, and hard to execute on, while she doesn't draft all that well. Sorry, I'm really starting to lose my voice here. Last champion though, Zyra, I'm going to put her in the C tier as well. I'd say she's definitely best as a support. Good into a lot of melee matchups. Especially ones that she can block hooks, like Pike, Blitz, Thresh, she can function well into. She can just generally abuse a lot of melee matchups. Maybe I can move her up to B, but it's kind of, if you were to pick an AP support that wanted to bully a melee matchup, you'd probably just want to pick something like Vel'Koz, Brands, or what's that? The other one, Xerath. So there are just better options than Zyra to do that. But yeah, she's pickable in some certain circumstances, I'm sure. I think I saw, was it Core JJ pick her recently? But yeah, she's not going to be seeing play really at all. Anyways, that is going to do it for my tier list. Just to recap, my only two Z tier champions are the most game-breaking champions right now, Aesol and Kai'Sa. Kai'Sa specifically with the AP Poke build. Bunch of good S tier champions. I'll just slowly scroll through here so you guys can take a good look. And that's going to do it. I was here for a while, ranking every single champion league. Again, this is purely a competitive tier list for patch 14.8. It'll probably remain somewhat the same throughout the entire season. But again, this is purely for competitive play, not for solo queue. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you guys actually watched this entire thing, I appreciate that, and I commend your dedication. Either way, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.